As a trauma survivor, I have always been interested in resilience. But growing up, I believed it was something that you were born with. Then in graduate school, I learned that it was a quality that we all possess and a set of skills we can all strengthen. Most of my resilience has come from writing and seeing myself in new ways by confronting the stories I've always told myself. The more I did that, the stronger I became, and I've dedicated my life to helping others do this work. This podcast is for anyone who wants to understand their story and how to revise it, because when we do that work, we change the world. If you've had an on-off relationship with someone, how do you write about them? Should you craft a linear memoir that reads more like a journey, or should you write something that mirrors your experience? That's what Lara Lillibridge, author of Girlish and Mama, Mama, Only Mama, grappled with while writing her latest memoir, The Truth of Unringing Phones, a story that explores the complicated relationship she had with her father, who died of dementia. Join us as we explore the impact of estrangement on the memoir writing process, how to protect your heart as you write about painful experiences, the power of publishing your story, and the aha Lara had about which part of the writing process heals you on this week's episode of the Writing Your Resilience podcast. Let's dive in. In memoir, every scene should move your story forward, but it can be difficult to figure out which scenes belong, let alone how to frame them when writing about trauma and other tough topics. How do you know which details are essential to your story and which ones will just overwhelm readers? And just as important, how do you write these scenes without triggering yourself? These are common questions that can be so tough to answer. That's why I'm teaming up with Jane Friedman on October 16th to teach Mastering Trauma Scenes to Improve Your Memoir. During this webinar, you'll learn the difference between trauma, crisis, and rising action, how a scene's position in your manuscript will determine which details matter, and how to slant your material so that it propels your story forward. You'll leave with a deeper understanding of your story, confidence in your ability to add tough scenes to your memoir, and tools that will help you care for your readers and yourself. Best of all, this webinar is only $25. That's right, $25. For that price, you'll get access to the webinar, a workbook filled with tips and tricks, a copy of the recording, and a copy of the comprehensive Q&A. So if you want to craft a story that hooks readers and keeps them glued to your memoir, join me on October 16th for Mastering Trauma Scenes to Improve Your Memoir. The link is in the show notes. Laura, it is so good to see you once again. Welcome to the Writing Your Resilience podcast. I am delighted to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk to you.
Well, I have been a fan of your work for years. In fact, I have all three of your books, and I don't know if I can hold them all up at the same time, but I'm going to try. So we have Girlish, Mama, Mama, Only Mama, and your newest book, which is the one that we're going to be talking about today, The Truth of Unringing Phones, which, oh my gosh, it just spoke to my soul. So first, I just want to say thank you for writing this, and I look forward to diving in. But what would you like us to know about you as a writer and about this book?
This was a really interesting book because I wrote the majority of it during the pandemic. And at the start of the pandemic, I lost my words. I used to be able to write for several hours at a time. I would write generally 2,000 words in a sitting, and I could barely string sentences together.
Yeah.
But I was mentoring a woman through AWP's Writer to Writer program, and I was asking her to write. So it didn't feel fair to ask her to write and to not write myself. So this book was entirely different in the process of writing it from anything else I had written. And the fact that it found a publisher and that it resonates with readers is just amazing to me.
Well, it definitely resonates with me. And by the way, my cat Foxy is here with us today. So we will say hello to Foxy. But yeah, this book resonates. And what you just said about, early COVID, especially, that happened to me too. I absolutely couldn't write. I think there was something about the enormity of what was happening that stole breath, words, everything that we had going on. And what I love is that you were trying to hold yourself accountable because you had someone else that you were mentoring and you want to walk your talk. And you did. So this book to me has this strong tension between yearning and wanting to lean in and this need to pull back. And I don't know if estrangement is the right word for what happens because it's not true estrangement, but it's definitely on that spectrum. And, I also noticed that this book is very different. I mean, you said it was different, but when I was reading it, it felt really different because the other two books that I've read, Girlish and Mama, Mama, Only Mama, both of those books feel very cohesive. Like there's an arc and it's pretty linear. We're going on a journey. I was all over the place in this book, which seems to mirror the emotional experience of having a parent like this. So, how did you know this was the right structure for this book?
So when I was 3 years old, my father moved over 4,000 miles away from Rochester, New York to Anchorage, Alaska. And I didn't have a linear story with him.
Yeah.
What I had were phone calls a couple times a year, visits a couple times a year, and a lot of silence in between.
Hmm.
And the amount that you change between a summer when you're 4 and a summer when you're 8, you're like a totally different person.
Yeah.
The years between 12 and 13, I remember when I was 12, I walked off the plane with my arms full of Cabbage Patch Kids. And at 13, I walked off in, my high tops and too much eyeliner and teased hair.
Right.
So there were so many gaps in our relationship that a linear story wasn't going to work. All I had in my relationship with my father were these fragments. And that tension that you talked about, I mean, my whole life, I've been in counseling forever. I mean, I think I started in counseling when I was like 5 or 6. My mom was a
Mm.
big proponent, and counselors always told me, like, you have to stop going to the well that's dry and expecting water.
Hmm.
And I was so desperate for my father's time and attention
Yeah.
and affection, but mostly time. And yet that yearning was destroying me, you
Hmm.
know? I think in a lot of ways, children truly have unconditional love in a way that adults struggle with, you
Yeah.
know? And it's not natural to try and turn that off for a parent,
Mm.
but he was the kind of parent that to love him was to destroy myself, because
Yeah.
he wouldn't or couldn't give me what I needed, which I think is true for so many of us, with parents and family members.
Yeah, it really can be, especially in our modern age. So I was looking at this video clip that Gabor Mate had, and he was interviewing this woman who was really feeling bad about her experience with parenting and, growing up. And she was asking, what did my ancestors have to go through and was it like this for them? And his answer was, it wasn't like this. This world that we live in now is so different, and the realities of this world is that sometimes you have parents that are very nurturing and really helpful and really supportive, and then sometimes you don't. And you have to make the really difficult choice to have strong boundaries. And a struggle that was in this book, it's not just, this push pull of this childhood experience, which you do render very clearly, but there's this inciting incident. Dad has Alzheimer's disease. So we have this parent who's going through this illness. And, so many of us, especially daughters, and I think it can hit firstborn daughters for, the most, but it can hit any daughters, this conflict around what does it mean to be a good daughter? Like, do you have to completely divorce yourself from your own experience and just give, give, give to your parents when they're aging and infirm and going through a lot of challenges? Or is it okay to protect yourself and do what's right for you?
For me, every book that I write is centered around a question.
Mhm.
And the central question for this book is, what do I owe a father who abandoned me now that he is old and lonely? And, as you said, he was suffering through dementia and denying it, and his wife was denying it. And so there was a bit of exploration of, like, is this real? Is this not real? Am I
Mhm.
exaggerating? Which is so much my relationship with my father in so
Yeah.
many ways. He so often walked the line where I was asking myself, is this abuse or not abuse? Am I being too sensitive, or is this really out of line? And so the dementia question so much mimicked all of my questions with my father that it felt very natural to have that as a theme.
Number one, thank you for talking about your essential question. I'm always telling people a book should have an essential question, but it is great when we hear an author who shares not just that they were thinking about that, but that they have it. And I feel like, yes, that is definitely the exploration in this book. And I felt that same push pull of, you know, a lot of things that happened felt like abuse, but what is the line that's being crossed? There were a lot of questions around that. And I think that the structure causes us to have as many questions as perhaps you did as the writer, trying to put all of this together. So there are a few different excerpts that I have marked that I feel like give us a sense of your writing voice for this piece and also a sense of the tension. And I'm wondering if you'd be willing to read those.
Absolutely, I would love to. This is in the titular essay, the essay that the book is titled, The Truth About Unringing Phones. The problem is, the space that I made when I walked away is filled with the echoes of his voice calling for me now that he is old and alone. The other children he chose over me, they don't want him either, not that they ever did. It was always their mother who forced them on each other. And as for me, I was never enough for him to choose. No matter who was smarter, prettier, did better in school. Perhaps my inescapable failure birthed my apathy. I never was very good at having goals beyond having a family of my own. I gave up trying to win at anything back in ninth grade, and it wasn't until I became a mother that I allowed myself to dream again. But Facebook posts show him smiling with other people's children, while my own sister wasn't invited to Thanksgiving, even though her son had died just 3 months before. I flew across the country for the funeral, and my father spent the morning at his step-granddaughter's third birthday and was late to the service. Life is for the living, he said. Weren't my sister and I still alive? He meant to be there earlier. It was not his fault it started to rain. I picture myself made of bronze, my cheek cold, my ears sealed shut. I wish and hope to be that taciturn and strong, but I am made of flesh and my heart still beats for him, though I tell myself over and over not to give in. And still I know I will mail him gifts again this year, and I will have to answer the phone on Christmas and New Year's and his birthday. And I know his faded voice will yearn for me. And still I will make excuses and hang up the phone as soon as 8 minutes are done.
That is so beautiful. And then we're going to continue on page 79 with the final paragraph of this essay, which is titled An Illustrative Example.
I didn't understand that my love for my father was like balancing my small body on a teeter-totter against his larger weight. I was always floating, leaning back, squirming to make something work on my own, when all I needed was for him to put down one foot to keep us in balance.
And then we're going to wrap up with this very short piece, Fragment of Yearning, Hope.
And I will just show people how small it is
Yes.
for a chapter. I am afraid if I open my father wounds, I will bleed out. It is easier to tell the stories that scarred me than the ones that brought me joy. Happy reminiscences breed hope, and hope scrapes away my resolve, reveals my soft, vulnerable underbelly that has never worked well for me when it comes to my father.
It's beautiful. And next to it, there is a map of Loon's Landing. So I love that you include a little graphic, which relates to things that are going to come next. So there is a bit of circling in this. We go back and forth. Also, in this book, there are a lot of pieces that are around the sea and the boat and, the sailing. How did you figure out how to put all of this together, given that it is disparate, but yet it feels like it's moving in a direction.
So it's always challenging to put together a collection of sort of small bits that are not linear. And for me, I took this wonderful class during the pandemic with Courtney Mom,
I love
and
her.
she talked about color coding your work. And that is something I live by. I use a chapter list that is just, the list of all of the chapters that I'm working with. And I go through and I color coded them for time. Okay,
Mhm.
childhood versus adult, present versus near past versus distant past. And then I also color coded them in terms of whether they were a fragment or a longer essay. And then I was able to look at that color coded list and see, oh, geez, I have 4 fragments in a row and then 3 long things in a row. That doesn't flow right. And I was able to really work on the balance that way.
Mhm.
The other thing that I do is then once I think I have it, like the way I want it, I put it on the floor in piles. So it's chapter by chapter, all on my living room floor. And then I look at the last paragraph into the next paragraph.
Mhm.
And I look at holes. And I also look at the balance of darkness to light.
Yes.
Be- because if my father was all bad, it would have been easier to walk away, right?
Mhm.
So I had to make sure that there were enough, at least glimpses of light, for the reader to understand why the conflict was so hard for me.
First, I just want to say kudos to Courtney Mom for giving you that great information. And yes, I love that you went through this book and you mapped everything out. So you were able to see it. Did you put it on a wall?
No, I put it just on the floor, literally, and walked around it.
And
Um,
that's a great idea too. So I always tell people, don't do everything on the computer because there are so many things your brain can't see and you cannot analyze in the same way. Use the wall, use the floor, use whatever you got, but spread it out and begin to see how these things are going together. And a question that's coming to my mind around this is about the emotional aspect of this work because I just got a question yesterday about how do you write about the lighter parts when the experience has a lot of darkness and this person caused direct harm? Like, how do you wrap your mind around it? And what did you do inside yourself to be able to write those parts without harming yourself?
and it's interesting, the excerpts you asked for me to read, because one of them is directly about this, in
Yeah.
that it was harder for me to write those tender moments
Hmm.
because I was so used to being defensive and holding myself, apart from him, that to allow myself to feel those feelings of love, I would write it and then just run away.
Hmm.
I would put the chapter in my digital folder and just not look at it again until I was ready to think of it as a project. But I needed some time and some space. And I do think that editing is where I find my healing. The act of taking the story from something that happened to me into a creative work of art transforms me, and it
Yes.
transforms my relationship with the work. And a first draft is very vulnerable. But by
Hmm.
the time you get to the third or the fourth draft, you are distancing yourself, and
Yes.
you are, separating yourself from the wounded person on the page, if that makes
Absolutely.
sense.
No, it makes total sense. And I can say for myself that the first time someone asked me to add in some lighter moments in a something I was working on that involved somebody that I have a very complex relationship with a lot of dark pieces, I wanted to give them a middle finger sandwich like here it is on a plate because I'm not doing this work. And I think that the resistance came from this worry that if I do this, I'm going to discount my own experience. And it was hard because I had to run up against and confront the wishes that I had for things to be different, the grief that I experienced around the pain. I had to see this person more clearly, in terms of all of their flaws and all of their wounds. And it takes time and effort to do that. And I ran away a bunch. But what I can say is that the act of continuing to show up and do the work and revise, like just what you said, that revision process gave me agency and it
Yes.
allowed me to integrate it into myself and transform it into something else so that it's not in me anymore. And I can say that I am fundamentally different and I'm different in that relationship because I did that work.
100% agree. And for me, so many people have said to me my whole life, like, why do you even talk to him anymore? Why
Yeah.
are you even in contact? Why do you even bother? And I felt diminished by that
Mm,
because on the one hand, they're validating my trauma, which is good. But on the other hand, like, I'm not an idiot, you
right.
know? And like, there were reasons that it was hard to let go. And there was reasons in every abusive relationship, whether it be with a partner or a parent or a friend, why we stay. And not only is it not honest to not show that to the reader, and it's hard to read a book that's all negative. But if you read a book that's all negative, you know there's more to the story than that,
Yes,
you
absolutely.
know, because otherwise we wouldn't stay, we wouldn't remain in contact. And my problem was, which is I think a lot of people's problem, is finding those moments because honestly, I
Hmm.
have been so consumed with the hurt and I'm 50, a lot of these events occurred a long time ago
Yeah.
and a lot of them blur together. And it becomes hard to remember where one trip ended and another began. So it makes it hard to write a linear story. But feeling like I represented the relationship properly and fairly, and feeling like I was able to look at those pieces of myself without my defenses,
Hmm.
it made me proud of myself. It made me proud of the work. And it's a kind of healing that I had no idea would come from writing until I wrote my first book length project, I think. When I wrote Girlish, when I finally realized, like, yeah, this chapter, I can close this chapter now.
Hmm.
I've accepted all of it, not just the parts I'm willing to accept, and I'm done, and I can go on with my life now and without regret.
Yeah. And I think that is the alchemy of this work. And it's the reason why I think everyone should write memoir, even if you don't
Yes.
publish it, right? We don't have to publish everything, but the work is powerful and important and it does change us. And I love that you shared both sides because I think we live in a very polarized world where everything is a binary, stay or go. There's no in between. And when people behave badly and abusively, we think that estrangement is going to solve all of our problems. And I can tell you it won't. I mean, I recently interviewed Dr. Ramani Durvasula, who does a lot of work around narcissistic abuse, and we talked about that. And she talks about it extensively in her book that cutting ties with someone does not change those feelings and it doesn't change your relationship. You might think about that person more, or you may have to deal
Yes.
with relationship issues with other family members that are equally, if not more fraught because of an estrangement. So it is really complicated. And I love that you honor that both for yourself, what your experience was, but also for the reader, because there are going to be readers out there who are reading this and they're going to go, I would just leave. I never would talk to this person again. And that's totally fine. But there are going to be other readers who are like, oh my gosh, finally, now I understand why it's so hard.
And I think there's a difference between estrangement and closure.
Yes.
And just because you've walked through the door doesn't mean it's not open. And, you know, with my father, there was never a time that I could say what I wanted to say and feel heard, even though he was receptive to those conversations. he was in therapy and he was in AA and he was very big at counseling speak, but he was a very big gaslighter who lived in
Yeah.
his own reality. And so nothing that he could say was going to make a difference. It had to be my own process and coming to terms with the relationship myself. And then, you know, when you have a parent that has dementia, it's hard because at that point, you're never going to get that resolution, or at least
Right.
I was not. Someone else might, but for me, I wrote about the last time I saw him. Well, one of the last times I saw him, he didn't remember me.
Yeah.
And he was still alive, but he effectively, that relationship was dead, you know, it was over. And I only had what I had always had, you know, and there's mourning in that I didn't expect. You know, that you can walk away from someone and think that you've hardened your heart and think that you've moved on, but then there still is a new level of loss to say that's all you ever had. Like,
Yeah.
that's, you know, but I think part of why it was important for me to publish this and not just write it is I think that so many of us have that experience with our
Yeah.
parents. And so many of us need to know it's okay to have complicated feelings. And it's okay to change your mind and go back after you've said, I'm never going to speak to them again, which is something that I did, you know. And it's okay not to be the perfect daughter and to
Yes.
say, like, I'm sorry, you haven't earned that place in my life. Um, and this is not a responsibility I need to take on. And I feel that society, particularly with daughters, pushes hard on that narrative of taking care of your parents sort of no matter what. But it doesn't serve us well, you know.
No.
But even as I say that, I still have guilt. Even as I say that, I still think, wow, did I, you know, can I accept that? And when you talk about resilience, you know, we're never done with something. We think we're done, right? We think we've processed this situation, this relationship, this trauma, and we're done and we're moving on. But things come back up at different times for different reasons.
Yes.
And resilience is being willing to address it as many times as you have to. And each time you do get stronger, and each time it is a little easier, I think.
Absolutely. And I think when we have these really big issues in our lives, you can't, there is no way to just heal it all at once, right? We just kind of chip away, then we,
Yes.
integrate that and we get stronger and then we come back to it when we need to. And, you had a very clear reason why you were publishing this book, which I think also speaks to your resilience, right? Resilience is the willingness to look at things and be open and honest with it in a way that allows you to heal. So that's a way of bouncing back. But you have published two other books before this. So I'm going to say you're a publishing veteran. And I didn't send you this question because I don't always send everything. Something comes up,
It's
right?
fine.
In the middle of
Right.
our interview. And I meet a lot of writers who have really tough stories and they feel compelled to write them and compelled to publish them. And there is a certain point in the process when there is this very secret wish that if I publish this, so and so will understand me, or the world will see my pain, or the world is going to give me something that they can't. And you have done this work enough. So, what can you say about the experience of publishing these books and how has that helped you have a really clear vision around this is how it's of service to others? And I'm not expecting the world to give me something in return.
What I hope to get, and I've been lucky to get in return, is people saying that my books have helped them.
Yes.
For people to say, I've never seen myself on the page until I read your book. From people say, you know, like, you made me more okay with myself. And that's all, that is the reason I write.
Yeah.
I learned so much about publishing in terms of my first book was Girlish. And for a month or two before it came out, I was racked with anxiety. I was dying. And for me, it was fear of what people would say in my family and the media, what response I'd get. And having lived through that, the books that followed have been easier, although there's certainly anxiety right before they all came out. But when you've gone through something and lived, you know that next time around you can go through something and live. And there is this wonderful writer named Kao Kalia Yang, who's a memoirist, and she also writes for children. And she said, you look back at your books almost like photographs of yourself at a younger period of time, that each book is a snapshot of who you were when you wrote the book.
Yes.
And it's okay to change and evolve, and you can look back and now you would write that book differently, but it's not about that. It's not about one book being the perfect story of everything. It's about, did you capture how you felt at that time?
Yes.
And that allowed me to let go of fear of perfection, or people would say, oh, why didn't you talk about this in your first book? And I go, oh my gosh, why didn't I talk about that? Well, I'm not done writing. I can fill those gaps later. And it helps, I think, when you've published a couple of books, to know that those chances are still there, so that if you have regrets, those chances to change them will appear if you keep doing the work. I don't know if that answers your question at all.
No, it was a beautiful answer. I loved it. And I think Jill Cement is trying to do that with her new memoir, Consent, which is a reconsideration of a previous memoir that she wrote called Half a Life, which I'll put this, there's a New York Times article that came out about this book, and I'll put it in the show notes so that people can read it. But yeah, we have a chance to do it again with new books. And that doesn't mean that if we missed something or we've changed or we didn't add such and such, that book was a failure or wrong, or, there's anything that we need to fix. It's just that we do change. We remember things differently. And as we heal, the story opens up, and that's, I think, the most important thing that can happen. And there are so many things we could talk about with this book because it's just a deep topic. And well, I love you, Laura. I could talk to you forever. And that's what I love about this podcast. There's so many people I can talk to, and you are definitely one of them. But I want to end with 3 lightning round questions about the writing process, and I ask them to everyone. So what is the best piece of writing advice you have ever received? You just gave us one great one, but what else?
With this book, I kept thinking about Ernest Hemingway's "Just write one perfect sentence."
Ooh, I love that.
And that was my focus for every writing session. Even if all I got was one sentence, it was a success.
All it takes is one sentence, and that's all you got to focus on. And then the next day you do the next one, and eventually you have a book. Well, how have you been nurturing your resilience now that this book is out and you're in the launch period? So I know you're doing different events and you're out there. What's helping you?
Honestly, doing events feeds me. To see people that are interested and that value my work really makes it worthwhile. It makes all of the anxiety and all of the trauma of the writing process feel like it was worth it. And it doesn't matter about book sales. It's just people that show up, people that are engaged, people that are, wanting to have those conversations.
That is such a great answer. And I think it's so important for people to think about, because so many people can be focused on the numbers. Like, did I have the book sales that are going to make me think, do this thing or win this award or be in this paper? But, at the end of the day, it really is about the relationship between you and the reader. And that is sacred. And I love that how you're honoring it.
Thank you.
Well, my final question is about how everybody can get their copy of The Truth About Unringing Phones, and also if they want to connect with you, because you're doing all kinds of neat things out in the world.
So The Truth About Unringing Phones is available wherever books are sold: Bookshop, Amazon. my publisher's website, which is unsolicitedpress.com. And it is currently in a Kindle or digital version. The paperback and an audio is in the works, but it might be a while. And for me, find me, I'm mostly on Instagram and Threads at Lara Lillibridge, no space, or Twitter at only_mama. And we can put those in the show notes as well.
Yes, they will absolutely be there. And please connect with Lara. She does so many great things out in the world. She's such a thoughtful person. And you can ask her a question or share what you think about her book. But most importantly, please add a 5-star review on Amazon and Goodreads, because that is how we support authors.
Thank you for saying that. And honestly, even a mediocre review is better than no review.
Yes.
Because it changes the algorithms and gets your book suggested to other people.
Yes, those reviews mean so much to authors. I mean, and it only takes 2 minutes, because you don't have to say anything, really poetic or brilliant. Just say, loved this book, found it inspiring because of X. 2 sentences. That's all you got to put. And it changes everything.
So true. Well, thank you so much for having me, Lisa. This has been such a pleasure speaking with you.
Well, and thank you for being here. And once again, thank you for writing your book. That's it for today's episode. If you'd like to learn more about Lara and her accomplishments, and most importantly, buy a copy of The Truth About Unringing Phones, please see the show notes for this episode. If you're learning from or enjoying this podcast, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's a free and easy way to support the podcast. You can also get the latest episodes delivered to your inbox by signing up for my Writing Your Resilience newsletter. As a thank you, you'll receive a free copy of A Trauma Survivor's Guide to Writing the Tough Stuff. You can also follow the podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, where you can leave a 5-star review. If you have questions for me, comments about the podcast, or questions or topics you'd like me to consider for the Writing Your Resilience podcast, please leave a comment on YouTube. I read them all, and I'd love to hear from you.